what should we be preparing for on our first night anyway?
So it's so interesting, because what we are still seeing in the Muslim community is that most parents are raising their children with this narrative, perhaps, of, we don't talk about sex in this house. Sex is bad, sex is shameful, and don't have sex until you're married. And then there is, at the same time, this expectation that when you are married, you're expected to have lots of sex, or, you know, if you're a girl, you're kind of expected to give sex to your husband, as if sex is something to give. But that's still the narrative. And so I find it really interesting when you ponder upon that, you know, you're not meant to talk about sex, you're not meant to learn about sex. And then when you're married, you're meant to know everything.
To know everything,
Exactly.
right?
You're meant to drop everything and have sex immediately on that wedding night. And so a lot of those questions were, is intimacy expected? In short, the answer is yes, is expected, but really that isn't the right question. The question should be, Islamically, what does it say about, are we kind of meant to have sex on that first night? And the answer is no, you don't have to have sex on that first night, on the actual night of your wedding. You can if you want to, and if you feel mentally and physically ready. Again, that will come from having the right education beforehand. But if you are newly married and you kind of perhaps got to know your spouse in that kind of traditional way, you probably won't feel mentally and physically ready on that actual night. You might want to continue getting to know your new spouse before you feel mentally and physically ready to have first time sex with him or her. So in terms of sex, it doesn't need to be on the actual wedding night. It can be a few days later, a few weeks later. It could even be a few months later. There is nothing in Islam, there is nothing in, you know, the Quran or the authentic Sunnah or Hadith that stipulates that it must happen by a certain day or a certain time. There is no time limit for consummation of the marriage. The marriage is still valid, and it really is very dependent on the couple. So some couples might be ready immediately and some will need more time, and none of the, like, there is no right or wrong there. It really is, if you stop and think about, the act of sex is a two-way thing. So it doesn't make sense for just one person to be ready, because it's going to involve another person. You're not going to have sex on your own. So it doesn't matter if you're ready on your own. It needs to be that the other person is ready too. And really see sex as kind of like teamwork between you and your spouse. If you're ready, but your spouse isn't. So let's say, for example, the man in this context happens to be ready mentally and physically and really wants to have first time sex with his new wife, but the wife in this context isn't ready. She doesn't feel mentally ready or physically ready. The husband should be thinking, what can I do to bring up my wife to my level? I'm physically ready and mentally ready. How can I help her? What fears does she have? What does she want to talk about to help prepare her? What can I do to really support her and bring her there? Because it is teamwork, like marriage is teamwork. And so this one part of your marriage, sex, is going to need to involve teamwork to help both of you be on the same page, inshallah.
Sounds like what you're saying is that this education that we need is not just for girls, this is for guys as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So if that, I'm thinking the more that a young man understands about what we're talking about, you know, what the role of sex is, you know, what sex means for a woman, you know, woman's pleasure, etc., etc. I'm wondering whether that will equip him to even have this conversation, because I'm just imagining a scenario where a boy doesn't know anything about what we're talking about and his wife is scared. He wouldn't even have the vocabulary, you know, he wouldn't even have the ability to have a conversation with her about it. I think he would just probably feel very sort of frustrated and rejected and not understand, well, why doesn't she want me? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And this comes again from education. I feel like when you asked me what do girls need to know, I forgot to say that really girls need to educate themselves about their bodies and about sex and about the desire for sex and how to manage their desire for sex. If, you know, they've made the decision that I want to follow Allah's prescription for sex and I want to wait until I'm married to have sex for the first time, how do I manage my natural desire for sex that I may have before I'm married? How do I manage that in a healthy, halal way? That also applies to boys as well and to men as well, that they need to educate themselves about their own bodies. They need to educate themselves about how to manage their desire for sex before they're married. And they also need to educate themselves about the experience of the opposite sex of their future wife. So you don't just need to learn about things from the lens of your own gender. You can also learn about things from the opposite gender too. And that also applies to girls. Girls can need to understand the male sexual anatomy, the male sexual response or desire for sex, and know that there are different types of desire, and this applies to males and females. The two main types of desire, they're known as spontaneous desire and responsive desire. Most people are familiar with spontaneous desire. They may not know it has that term, but I'll briefly explain what it is. Spontaneous desire typically happens when you have that kind of feeling of initial attraction, perhaps towards someone, or maybe something you see, an image you see, and you feel a desire. You maybe feel a physical response within your body, and you know that you are perhaps sexually turned on or sexually aroused, and you desire to be intimate sexually with someone. That is spontaneous desire. It kind of happens immediately, spontaneously. The other type of desire is known as responsive desire, where it's very dependent on the context a person is in. Both types of desire, spontaneous and responsive, can apply to men and women. With responsive desire, it's not from an initial spark or initial attraction to someone. It's someone feeling safe, feeling comfortable, feeling relaxed, having the right environment physically around them, but also being in the right mental and emotional environment. When all those things are in place, they then respond positively to those different stimuli, and then they start to feel sexually aroused and desire sex. So both girls and boys need to know that, because typically what we're noticing is that females tend to experience more responsive desire and men tend to experience more spontaneous desire. But it is possible for women to have spontaneous, and it is possible for men to experience responsive. So it is definitely fluid and dynamic. But I feel like if boys especially, and men especially, understand that oh, my future wife may experience more responsive desire. She may not have the same desire where, you know, when I look at my wife, I'm instantly attracted and want to have sex on the spot. She may not feel that way. And if she does experience more responsive desire, what can I do as the husband to give her the right stimuli, the right environment physically, the right environment mentally and emotionally, to help her become sexually turned on? So that is definitely really important. And sex education is gender neutral. We need to be teaching our boys about it, our young men about it, just like we need to be teaching our girls and young women about it.
MashaAllah. Amazing. So we've talked about the kind of, you know, maybe jitters, wedding night nerves, you know, just the shyness, those types of things that could potentially lead someone to not feel ready on their first time.